I just kind of feel like standing. I don't know why, but usually I have to kind of stay in one place because I kind of want to wander if I stand up. So if I do this too much, you'll have to let me know. But my name's Mike Chaplin, and if you're here visiting for the first time, I'm not normally the guy that's here. Greg, I think Greg's probably joining with all the other ministers in the state of Nebraska, and they're all gathered hand in hand around Memorial Stadium trying to heal our Husker Nation after last night, you know, kind of thing. And, but actually, I know he's spending some time away with his wife, which is a great thing, and I'm happy for that. And he called and wanted to know if I would just kind of share a story about a part of my life that he's asked me several times to do that. And I got to be honest with you, I don't really like to, and some of you, as I've spoke here before, I've shared a little bit of it, but I've never really, you know, kind of told the story itself and really what I learned out of that whole thing, and really what God taught me out of that. And honestly, he asked me probably 3 different times to share this when I was going to speak, and every time I just kind of backed out at the last minute because I don't like talking about it. It's not a fun thing for me to talk about. It's a lot easier to pick somebody else's life in the Bible and talk about things that they did or things that they didn't do. It's a lot easier to talk about those things rather than talk about yourself and what's gone on in your life. And I had the opportunity I was asked again to do this here a few weeks ago, and I came to that point again where literally the Saturday before I'm like, okay, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to talk about something else. And took the time and I kind of just prayed about it, and I said, okay, you know, here we are again, and I'm backing out again. And as I thought about it, I thought, you know, the things that I really love about stories in the Old Testament is that they are real, and there's the good, and there's the bad, and there's the ugly. And what makes them really speak to us is the fact that there is good, and there is bad, and there's really ugly, and we can relate to those things. And as I got to thinking about that, I thought, you know, there has to be times when David, if he's in a place where he can know what's going on, where David has to simply say, oh man, I can't believe they're preaching another sermon about Bathsheba. You know, can't they talk about, you know, maybe when I killed Goliath or something like that, or you know, it's so embarrassing, and man, I just wish they'd quit talking about that and forget that story. Or how would you like to be Zacchaeus? And, you know, we get to heaven and everybody that sees Zacchaeus goes, hey, look, there's the wee little man. The wee little man was he. You know, because that's how we're all going to relate to him. And I thought about all those stories that we read about in the Bible that I just love. And I thought, those stories speak to us because they're real. And so this morning, I want to be real with you. I want to tell you up front that I don't like talking about some of these things. I don't like talking about painful times in my life. And there's good things and there's bad things. And I just want to tell you this, that I've had a great life. And part of the reason that I don't like to talk about this is because I know some of you in this room. And I know that compared to things that you've gone through, the thing that I talk about this morning makes me feel ridiculous that it was such a big deal to me. But it's kind of like how there's really nothing considered minor surgery if it's your surgery. When it comes to pain, when you're living in that moment of pain, your pain is huge, and it's real, and it's bigger than anything that anybody else has ever gone through. And that's kind of where I was at that time. My life kind of got turned upside down with a phone call that I got. I was at work and this anonymous person called and said, I just thought that you might want to know that your wife has been driving into our neighborhood, parking her car, and getting in a vehicle with another guy. Just thought you'd want to know. Of course, I was like, well, who is this? That doesn't matter. I just wanted you to know that. And so that phone call began a process of trying to find out what in the world was going on. And in this moment of like, I don't know what to do, and a little bit of panic and wondering what in the world was going on, I made a phone call to my minister. And the anonymous caller had said that the person that they were getting into was a guy in a little blue car. So I call my minister and I'm telling him, I don't know what's going on. I got this phone call, and he listens to all this and he stops me and he says, Mike, I'm the guy in the little blue car. And I tell you, that moment, I really can't describe exactly what I felt, but I can say that it wasn't good. Because a lot of things all of a sudden made sense. And that began a process of over a 3-year period that was just nasty. Because I really wanted to try and fix this thing, and I kind of have to back up for a second, because you really need to understand about this church that I was a part of. Because this was the church that I was born and raised in, and my parents were the type of parents that, man, if the church doors were open, I was there for the time I was burping, spitting, and wearing diapers. And even later on when I was just burping and spitting, and a teenager, I was there. And every time the doors were open, I was there. And, I was an elder in the church. My brother was an elder in the church. My brother-in-law was an elder in the church. Pretty much all of my family, except one family member, attended there, and that's because she lived in Colorado. So this was not just a kind of a passing by thing. This was, my life was invested in this church. And I was determined that I was going to fix this thing, because I knew the ugliness that was going to happen if this all came out, and it was just going to be nasty and bad, and I just didn't want to see that happen. And I talked to the minister, and he assured me that, it was a done deal. Nothing's going to ever happen again. And a year passes, and things are still happening. And so I went to the associate minister, and I said, will you go with me? And so the two of us sat him down and talked with him again. Oh yeah, I guarantee you nothing's going to happen. It's all a done deal. It's not going to happen again. I promise you that. Went through counseling, met with him on a weekly basis to try and heal that trust. And finally, after 3 years of things continually happening, I didn't know what to do. And for work, I was driving down Lincoln, and I was driving up 48th Street, and there used to be this little house there that had a sign that said New Life Counseling, I think is what it said. And as I'm driving by there, I don't know what to do, but I pull in there and I walk in, and there's a guy sitting there, and I'm like, I really need to talk to somebody. And he looked at his watch and goes, well, I got somebody coming in here in about 10 minutes. What's going on? So I told him, and he said, okay, give me 5 minutes. Got on the phone, called, said, come back some other time. I need to talk to this guy. And we sat down and we talked, and he made it very clear to me. He said, Mike, right now, the thing you need to do, if you're going to do what the Bible teaches, is you just need to turn this over to the elders, and whatever happens, happens, and it's their decision to make, and if they tell you to let it go, you need to let it go. And so I did, and I tell you what, things just were even worse than what I had imagined that they were going to be. Because the church really split. and people took sides, and there were all these battle lines that were drawn, and I mean, I had friends that I had grown up with in the church there that I felt like at times they were going to pick up stones and drag me out and beat me up and stone me. I mean, it just turned so nasty, and it became such a lightning rod that I finally just thought, I've got to get out of here. And so I left and started going someplace else, and you know, he ended up resigning, and it's really sad still today for me to see this church that had been growing and vibrant, that's just been split and mutilated and struggles on a daily basis. And it was that was a dark time for me during that time. I have to tell you, I went through a spiritual death during those 3 years, going to church every Sunday, seeing him. You know, I stepped down as an elder. I pulled out of being a youth group leader. I didn't teach Sunday school anymore. I didn't do any of those things. And I just died. I suffered through 2 weddings, watching this guy perform 2 of my daughter's weddings, and being sick to my stomach the whole time, because I loved his family. And that was a dark time, and I can't tell you how dark it got. And I literally felt like I was in that pit. And if any of you have ever walked through those times when you just feel that sense of just being alone and in that dark place, those are moments that are lonely and hurt and painful. But I think the bottom for me came, we reached a point where I said to my wife, I said, you know, you really need to make a choice here. And she chose to leave, and she decided that she wanted to try and start a life with him, and that was what she was thinking was going to happen. And so she left and went through the whole divorce and everything, and it was, you know, as divorces go, it's just one of those things that brings out the worst in everybody. And this whole thing with the church was all going on in the background, and being accused of things, and it was just bad. But I think the lowest time was, if you've ever gone through a divorce or where somebody leaves you, there's that moment where you know it's all going to happen. And that night I was sleeping upstairs, and my wife was down on the main floor in one of the bedrooms there sleeping. And the next morning I knew that family was going to come, and they were going to load up stuff, all of her stuff, and she was going to be moving out the next day. And I was laying upstairs there, and it was just a really, really painful time just thinking about it and thinking about what was going to happen. And this part of the story is really kind of funny to me right now. It wasn't at the time, but and if you knew me really well, you would know this is funny, because my therapy for that night was I sat down and I wrote this poem. Now, if you know me, you know that my idea of good poetry is Dr. Seuss. You know, that's good stuff. And so for me to write this poem is pretty hilarious. But I sat down and I wrote this down, and the poem went like this. It said, because this is what I was really feeling at the time, it said, how do you say goodbye to 25 years of your life? How do you say goodbye to the woman you loved your wife? Tell me, how do you say goodbye to all your hopes and dreams? How do you say goodbye through tears that flow like mountain streams? How do you say goodbye when your heart just won't let go? How do you say goodbye when all you really want to say is hello. Now, I'm telling you, if any of you are country western singers or hoping to be a country western singer, I want to tell you, that song right there is a chart buster. And I give you full permission to use it because you can just hear somebody singing that. You know, how do you say goodbye when your heart is won't let go? How do you say goodbye when all you really want to say is hello? Yeah, I mean, Ken, would that be good? Yeah, I'll tell you what, that is a chart buster right there. That is a chart buster. And I expect to hear it someday if maybe you are planning on recording something. But at the time, you know, that was my therapy, and I took that and I went downstairs, and I was really surprised that the door to the bedroom was unlocked. And I opened the door and I walked in and I laid it down on the pillow next to her, and I went back upstairs, knowing full well that tomorrow she was going to be gone. And the next day was kind of a surreal moment because our house at that time was this wide open floor plan. When you step inside the front door, you can see all the rooms on the main floor. And when I came home, I stepped inside there and I opened up the door and I stood there for a minute, and I'm just looking around the room and I see these holes where there's been furniture. And I see here there's a hole, and here's a hole, and here's another hole. And it was just like pieces of your life had kind of just been snapped up and vanished. And you're looking around, and it's just a real surreal moment when the finality of it all just kind of sets in. And I'm standing there, and I looked over, and I could see into the bedroom where she had been, and it's completely emptied out. And then as I'm standing there just kind of just soaking this up and just kind of thinking about it, I noticed over there on the floor there's a wadded up piece of paper. And it's laying by the window there. And I walked over and I picked it up, and sure enough, it was that poem. And I gotta tell you, that was the moment when I lost it. I walked over and I picked that thing up, and I held it in my hand, and I walked upstairs, and I fell down on the bed, and I bawled. I can't tell you how hard I bawled, but that was the dagger that went and got me. And I cried, and pretty soon that sadness turned to anger. And I remember I rolled over on my back, and I shook my fist at God, and I said, "You tell me how I can let go of all this." And then I just rolled back over, and I just cried and fell asleep. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and if you've ever been to that point where you just cried yourself asleep, or it's that exhausted emptiness. And I got up, and the house was dark, and I walked downstairs and flipped on the kitchen light, and on the kitchen table, that was where I always kept my Bible, and I sat down at the table, and I reached over and I pulled that Bible towards me. And I just sat there for a little bit. Pretty soon I said, "Man, God, I need to hear something from you right now. And I need something to just get me up tomorrow." And it was one of those really, I look back on it now, and it's just one of those God moments where I open up my Bible, and it opens up to Matthew, to the crucifixion story. And I kind of didn't really need to read it because I knew it, but I just kind of started reading it. It was just so, if you've ever had one of those moments where God just speaks to your heart, it's very clear to me when he says, how do you say goodbye to your one and only son? How do you say goodbye and send a Savior that's going to be spit on, ridiculed, crucified? And it really hit me in that moment that God really understood. He felt my pain that I was feeling. And I can't tell you exactly in words, I can't describe all that, but I can tell you that in that moment, the hope that I needed was there. And what I needed to get up that next day and continue walking was there. God was enough to pick me up. And I started that journey of, healing and forgiveness. And one of the things that you read about in Scripture, and one of my favorite books is the book of Ruth. And how Ruth and Naomi are in a very dark time, and God provides for them in a man named Boaz, the kinsman redeemer. It's a beautiful story. If you haven't read it, do it. But God brought people into my life that I have to tell you, if he had not, I can't tell you where I'd have been, but I know I probably wouldn't be at the point that I'm at this point. But he brought a guy in my life named Brian Lang, and Brian was a junior high youth sponsor of mine when I was in junior high. And Brian, he knew I was a total idiot, even though I was much older. He knew I was still an idiot. And so he was good enough I used to ask him, I said, Brian, will you just hold me accountable? Whatever you tell me to do, I will do, because right now, I'm an even bigger idiot than anything. I want to go kill people. I want to, who knows what I might do. And so he agreed, and we met once or twice a week, and he held me accountable for things. He brought healing into my heart. He invested in me in a great way. And after a period of time, he finally said to me, he said, you know what, Mike? I think you're ready to start thinking about dating. And so he told me that, here's the deal. You have to date 10 people before you can even begin to get serious about any of them. Now, for some of you younger college guys, maybe dating 10 people is kind of like a weekend activity. I don't know. But for a 40-something guy that had been married for 25 years who was just simply, in a place that was surrounded, all your friends were married, everybody that you had been a family guy for years and years and years, the thought of dating again was horrible. I mean, I can remember standing in front of the mirror and looking at myself going, oh God, I need help. Please, I need help. I'm going to need lots of help. Send me a blind woman or something, I need help. But it was an amazing thing. And I can tell you, if you want to hear some funny date stories, just talk to me afterwards. I'll share those with you because we don't have time to this morning. But my first date was absolutely horrible. It was hilarious, but it was horrible. And almost scared me to death. But I began this process. And so, I'm trying to find some single people to date. And so I was probably about halfway through the list. About number 5. And I know, ladies, please excuse this, because as I'm going to talk about this sounds horrible, but this is my life at the time. And so I'm on about number 5. And the church that I was attending at that time, you know, they had this choir that sang up front. And I'm sitting there in church, and I look up, and in this choir, it was one of these Hollywood moments, you know, where the spotlight comes on and the angels go, oh, you know, that was it. That was the moment. It was, I see this woman. And I can't, this sounds so crazy, but I cannot explain this, but I knew that this was the gal that I would eventually marry. The only problem was, I had no idea who she was, didn't even know her name. And so I began this investigative process. Now, I'll just say that because stalking sounds kind of creepy, but you know, it was really stalking. But I began this investigative process, and part of that was to try and create this setup. Okay, so after the choir gets done singing, they always came down into and sat down in the church setting. And it was, at that time, the church hadn't built a new addition yet, and it was really crowded, so they always had to look really hard for seats. So I always made sure that I was sitting on the aisle with an empty seat next to me. You know, thinking, sooner or later, she's going to pick that seat. It's going to be awesome. You know, I can hear wedding bells and all that stuff. And it never worked. Every old lady in the choir sat next to me. You know, it was just horrible. And the plan was not working. And so I initiated this strategic plan, okay? And it had two parts. Two parts. It had two parts. One was to find out her name, so that was important. And the second part was to get through the rest of my list, because, you know, I didn't want to ask her out until I was already through the list, because, you know, I couldn't get serious. And so literally, I blew through those last 5. You know, I had one weekend where 7, 8, 9, boom, boom, boom. You know, all Friday, Saturdays. You know, I had 2 dates on Saturday. It was crazy. You know, I feel bad about that now, because it was literally like, you know, hey, nice to meet you. Can I get your phone number? Because I had to be accountable to Brian, because sometimes he would just, you know, he would say, oh, so you had a date? Yeah, I had a date. Who? And I'd have to tell him who. You know, and there were even times where he would take the phone number and call the person and say, hey, I hear you had a date with Mike. How was that? Did he treat you right? You know, and all this stuff. You know, it's like crazy. You know, but that's Brian. And so I get through the list, okay? And so I'm finally through the list, and all my investigation finally paid off. And so then I decided, okay, the time come to call her and ask her out. And so I dialed. Well, it took about 2 hours to get the nerve up to call, because there was a lot of pressure. Because you got to understand, I knew that we were going to get married, but I knew she probably didn't know, and wasn't even sure she even knew who I was. You know, so this is kind of a strange predicament. So I finally got around to calling her after a lot of hanging up and dialing and redialing, and we chit-chatted for a few minutes, and then I asked the big question, and she said no. I tell you what, that just blew me up. I didn't know what to do with that. I sat there. I honestly don't know if I said anything or if I just hung up. I asked her here the other day. I said, did I say anything after that? She doesn't remember either. But I think I probably just said, okay. You know, I was in total shock, because you know, God had told me this was the guy. You know, I knew it. And you know, I'd been praying about that moment for so long, and then it didn't work out like I was hoping. But a really cool thing happened, because God really changed my heart. And instead of praying that God would get her and I together, I simply started praying for her specifically. And in the great room of the house that I lived in at the time, there's a couch there, and that was my praying spot. And so I remember the first time I just started praying for her, because it was such an odd prayer, because I just simply said, you know, God, I know her name. I don't really know a whole lot else about her. I don't know what's going on in her life right now, but I know she's a single mom. And I know that single moms have needs, and I know that you know what those needs are. And so I literally started praying for her on a daily basis, just praying for her instead of praying about her. And months went by. Nothing. No contact, no coming, sitting next to me in church, nothing. And I pretty much just decided, this must have just been a hallucination that Mike had, And sometimes when you want something, you know that God directed you that direction too, because that's what you want. And so I kind of just dismissed it and started thinking, well, maybe I need to come up with another list of 10 or something, or something like that. And then the big break happened. I was in the checkout stand at Sun Mart, and I looked 2 checkout stands over, and there she was with some groceries. And so I hurried up and checked out, got to my truck, and waited. And then I just happened to drive by when she was walking to her car. I mean, it was totally innocent, just happened. And so I drive past and I'm like, oh, hi, hey, funny to see you here. And talked to her for a few minutes, and she actually agreed to see me that evening, and we went for a walk. And after we went for a walk, she came out to my house, and we sat on the deck, and we talked. I don't know, it was probably 4 or 5 hours. We sat on the deck there and talked. And it was an amazing thing. It was like we'd been friends for years and years and years. It was truly an amazing thing. And it piqued enough interest on her part that she actually decided that she wanted to see me again. And we've been married for 7 years now. And it's been great. And the reason that I share all that with you is because some of you may be able to relate to the really good part of that story, where life is great and you couldn't ask for any more. And some of you may be at that other side of the story where things are really dark and you're just not really sure that God even exists, or if He's even listening or sees your pain. And the thing I want you to understand is that the best part about that story is not that Allison and I ended up getting married. The best part of that story is really the fact that for the first time in my life, in that very dark moment when I understood that God was enough, that He became this anchor point for me. And I've got to tell you that I am a better husband today than I ever was before, because I don't need that relationship with Allison in order for me to be solid. And I see so many people that jump out of one bad relationship into another bad relationship because they're looking for that anchor. And that anchor is not that other person. It's not found in something else. It's only found in the arms of God. And I'm here to tell you that is the truth that God taught me through all that. He is enough. And the best advice that I got from Brian was, before I ever had the opportunity to date again, was to get comfortable with being alone. But you're not alone. That's the lesson that God took me from that pit and brought me back to my feet. Was the only hope that kept me going through all that time was knowing that I was not alone. The one scripture that I just grabbed onto and held onto was Lamentations chapter 3, verse 19 through 24. It says, "The thought of my suffering and homelessness is bitter beyond words. I will never forget this awful time as I grieve over my loss. Yet I still dare to hope when I remember this. The faithful love of the Lord never ends. His mercies never cease. Great is his faithfulness. His mercies begin afresh every morning. I say to myself, the Lord is my inheritance, therefore I will hope in him." And the part that I really want to offer you today is where he says that his mercies begin afresh every morning. Because if you're going through one of those times, I want to tell you something. You're going to screw up, and you're going to blow it, and you're going to feel like, man, you know, I'm just an idiot. But those mercies that God offers us, that he refreshes every morning, we sang about it in that second song. That was awesome. I loved it when I saw that come up. That those mercies that God offers to you, he offers to you that fresh start each morning, every day. And there are times that you mess up, but he picks you up and starts you down that path again. And it's a great, great thing to know that it's there for you. Let's pray. God, just like I prayed when I was praying for Allison the first time, I don't know what the needs are in this room right now. But God, I do know that the answer to those needs are you. And I do know that in your presence we find healing. And in your presence we find a changed heart that can actually forgive those that hurt us. And through your healing power, God, we have hope to be able to move beyond whatever our circumstances are right now and to become more like you. And God, so God, that's my prayer this morning for each person here, whether things are just hunky-dory right now or whether they're living in a pit. I pray that they will find their hope in you. And we just offer this up to you in the one that gives us hope, your Son, Jesus, that we rely on each and every day for our mercy. God, we love you and we thank you. Amen.
Awesome story. If you want to stand with me, we'll sing a couple more songs, and I want to remind you that